Hello, my name is Peter Menchaca. I'm a Client Solutions Advisor at iAcquire, and today we're going to be going over chapters 3 and 4 in Joe Pulizzi's book, Epic Content Marketing. Okay, so chapter 3 is titled Why Content Marketing, and going to start this chapter off with just a quick fact, or rather two quick facts. First being that in 1970, the average consumer received about 500 or so marketing messages a day. Whereas last year, or rather 2 years ago in 2011, the average consumer received about 5,000 messages a day. And that number is set to increase exponentially as the years go on. So right off the bat, we know that consumers are seeing more marketing messages a day, but they're also interacting more with those messages. And we're not ignoring all 5,000 of these. So your messaging is important, and in order to be recognized by consumers, your brand needs to have a strong marketing message to grab their attention. So let's talk about the case for content and why brands should be investing in content. A few reasons here why this is important. Number one, there's no technology barriers, so you or I can publish content the same way that theoretically the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times can, and we can potentially have the same reach, and there's very little technological barriers for us to reach a wide market of people. Two, there's a high talent availability, meaning that there's a lot of journalists and editors and content people from traditional media that are making their way towards brands as brands are investing in content marketing more and more. Three, content acceptance. 4, social media, and 5, Google. So let's talk about social media and Google. So people are obviously sharing more and more content on social media, and that kind of ties into Google here, because Google has been improving their algorithms since they've begun, but over the past few years they've made some very strong steps towards being able to deliver content that is from credible websites, that has legitimate signals such as social signals, the links linking back to that content. And more we're seeing that search engines, primarily Google, are just becoming better and better at delivering content that people want to read, that delivers a good user experience to people. So it's really important for brands to develop content on their sites that is legitimate, and if by doing so they're going to be rewarded by Google. So that's a big one there. Brands are increasingly investing in content marketing. The largest example, or the example that we talked about in the book, was Adobe. So Adobe runs a website called CMO.com, and it's kind of like a marketing newsletter. They post various articles related to marketing, and that's not directly tied to what Adobe does. It doesn't sell products on CMO.com, but it's a good example of a traditional brand taking on a publisher role and being successful with it. There's a lot of, as you can imagine, decision makers that visit CMO.com, and it's a really good example of, this new type of content marketing. Finally, I'm going to leave it off with a quote here that says, "Publishing is not dying. Ad-supported content is dying." And that transitions well into chapter 4. So the business model of content marketing. Again, gonna start off this chapter with a comparison between we're gonna talk about how media companies compete with brands. And they compete pretty much identically in a lot of different ways. The thing that differentiates them is the way that they make their money, however. Media companies like New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Economist, all the major brands, publication brands, they make their money through subscriptions and advertising, whereas brands make their money through attracting and retaining customers. So again, they're both focused on developing high quality content and attracting readers and whatnot, but the way they make their money is very different, and we'll talk about why that separates the two. The book talked about a case study of Lego, and the example they used for Lego was in the 1980s and 1990s, Lego was seeing a lot of competition from other children's toys that specialized in construction. I can't remember any off the top of my head, but basically what Lego did was their product was very easily recycled, or it can very easily be stolen from these other competitors. And what they did was they developed a multi-pronged content approach where they developed microsites, they developed animated series, they developed meetups. Legoland was another content initiative, and all these things are Lego's a toy company. They build blocks of toys for children, and you have this very traditional toy company going out and doing all these things that a non-traditional, in a non-traditional way, and they really benefited from that. So they were able to gain a competitive advantage in an industry that was very, people can easily come in and take their spot. And Lego is obviously it's world renowned for its toys, and one of the reasons for that was their content strategy that they did and their content marketing they did in the 80s and 90s. So why all of a sudden can brands start competing with traditional publishers? There's three reasons. Resources, equal footing, and one versus two audiences. So resources, what we mean by that is brands have a lot more flexibility, a lot more money, a lot more talent and people now than traditional media companies can, and they can pivot more, they can just invest more in their content initiatives, and that's a major reason why we're seeing brands competing so aggressively with these traditional media companies. Two, equal footing essentially means that the ability to reach an audience is no longer determined by how many newspapers you sell a day. The example that is given in the book is when the New York Times in February of 2013 published an editorial article against Tesla Motors. They wrote a bad review about the new Tesla car. In response to that, what typically in the past what a company might have done is they might have taken out full page advertisements, or they might have written an article and tried to get it published in the Wall Street Journal or something along those lines. But what Elon Musk did, what Tesla did, was they published a response on their blog that garnered a lot of attention, and I think the New York Times even issued an apology because they had some wrong data in their newspaper. So that just shows you that a blog of a website of a company can compete and get the same amount of attention that the New York Times can, and that's one of the main reasons why brands can now compete. Lastly, one versus two audiences. What this essentially means is that if I'm writing for a traditional publication company, I'm writing for my reader, but I'm also writing for my advertiser. So I need to balance the two there. Whereas if I'm writing for a brand, if I'm writing for Lego or Adobe or Tesla, I'm not writing to appease any advertisers. I'm writing just for the purpose of providing good content for my users, for my readers, and that's a big difference. I don't need to have in the back of my head thinking, if I write this, am I going to lose advertising dollars? And that's a really big differentiator. So finally, let's talk about 7 ways to take the media world by storm that the book recommends. One is making mobile a top strategy. It highlights just the fact that majority of users now are, not a majority, but a large percentage of people who are consuming content on the internet are consuming it via their mobile or tablet devices. And that number is just going to keep exploding as more and more people use mobile. 2 is hire professional journalists and writers. I think we talked about this in chapter 3, but there's a large market of people out there with journalistic experience, and they're making the switch from traditional media to this more non-traditional media, and so hire those people, and they'll do a good job. Repurpose all of your content. So instead of creating one piece of content or a blog post, take that same idea, but spread it out into 20 different segments, and really kind of leverage your ideas more than once is what the book recommends. A rent-to-own content strategy. So utilizing traditional media in the sense that you need to publish content not just on your own assets, not just on the properties that you own, which is what this is advocating. Develop professional editorial practices. That one's pretty self-explanatory. Buy a media company. Just if you don't want to, I guess, invest in your own content marketing, if there's a a media company that's in the same vertical that you operate in, the book suggests to buy the company, and then you instantly kind of gain that audience that they've built up. And finally, prioritize your reader. That one's pretty self-explanatory, but if you're a brand and leveraging content marketing, you have to kind of take a step back and remember that you're doing this to attract and retain customers. So don't let that focus kind of slip out of mind. And if you're able to keep the eye on the prize and prioritize your audience, then you're ultimately going to see the most amount of success. So that was chapters 3 and 4. This is iAcquire Cliff Notes Tuesday. My name is Peter. Thank you very much.